Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. We almost never talk about women's watches, not just here on this channel, but really in general, in the watch sphere, right? I mean, I think our viewership is something like 98% male. It's a sausage fest here. And I think that other creators can probably say very similar things about their channel. But today I want to take some time and talk about women's watches. There are two watches in particular that I'd like to discuss, one from Tudor and one from Longines, a little over $6,000 and a little under $2,000 respectively, that I think represent a ton of value in the women's space. And zooming out even further, I want to talk about the importance of women in this category, the future of women in this category so far as I see it, both from a business influencer point of view and then from a consumer kind of adoption point of view. And I think today's going to be a great episode. Let's start with this. I generally don't think about women's watches. I generally don't. I generally recommend and think about, when I think about women's watches, I think about women wearing men's watches. Most of the men's watches that I wear would be very well suited to most women. I wear vintage watches, and vintage watches are generally smaller, and they actually are generally more suited for the modern woman than they are the modern man, because men's watches have gotten so much bigger. They've come down recently, but they're still, relatively speaking, on the big side. So let's start here. Let's start off with the two watches I want to discuss, and then we'll go into the larger conversation about the current, the past, present, and future of women's influencers and consumer adoption. So number one, we'll start off with Longines. Longines is a fantastic brand. As you guys know, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of all their, basically all of their, collections. I'm a big fan of the Legend Diver. I'm a big fan of the Maya Tech. I'm a big fan of the Conquest. Of the Master Collection. I've got a salmon one with beautiful engraved numerals. I'm a big Longines fan. Longines, as a brand, has remained so steadfast in their dedication to delivering valuable, really well-made Swiss watches for well over 100 years. The Longines factory, which I believe was founded or established sometime in the late 19th century, in the 1860s or 70s, I believe, it's been there and been in the same place since. Longines is an institution. I don't think you really get a brand that could be possibly more of a mainstay and institution in this industry. And in the last, couple of years, Longines has done more and more to try to not just sell watches to women, but get women involved in the conversation, in the watch conversation. They've developed product that is not just smaller versions of men's watches, but rather, women's watches that are specifically catered to what their market research and their, taste is saying women would like. And they've done a fantastic job, particularly as it pertains to their, equestrian collections and bringing in, kind of the leather design language from that world into their straps. And they've done a great job. Longines has done a great job. And there's one watch that I just saw just the other day at London Jewelers that in Manhasset that I had never seen before. And it was their new Conquest collection. So now the Conquest collection, time only, comes in 30, 34, and 38 millimeter size. The 30 millimeter size is slightly different in design language, which I think is a little bit wonky. I think that they should be more consistent, but I digress. The 34 millimeter watches are really what caught my eye. And particularly in this green color, which is also manufactured in blue and in pink. But the green to me is just incredible. Probably second being blue and third being pink. But they're all terrific. But this green Conquest to me was perfect. This watch really seemed to sort of reflect everything that, the modern, somewhat, athletic or whatever, like sporty maybe is a better word, casual woman might want in a watch today, right? It's not a jewelry piece the way some other beautiful Longines are. Right? My mom has a beautiful, Longines Master Moon that is very, elegant and has a waffle dial and a moon phase. That's great. But this piece with its chunky case, great dial details, bright color, and rubber strap that matches the dial is something very fresh. I'm not seeing this everywhere in the watch industry. We're seeing this sort of stuff be manufactured for men. Sure. This is, this follows the same idea that the modern Rolex Daytona and Oysterflex follows. Same idea. Right? That you want a really well-made, detailed watch on a rubber band, with a strong case that balances kind of sport and elegance pretty freaking well. Airs more on the side of sport, but still balances them really well. Right? And the price point at $1975, I think, is fantastic. Right? Longines is a brand that really is, and so approachably priced, but we're talking about, these are luxury watches. And their pricing strategy is just to say it's approachable it almost doesn't make sense, right? And I frankly think, and this video isn't sponsored, so I can kind of say whatever I want. I frankly think that Longines is maybe even a little bit underpriced sometimes, and that sounds crazy. I think that my Master in Salmon, which was just over $2,000, was underpriced. I think if they raised the price by 30%, and without a 30% raise, but it was originally released 30% higher, people still would have bought it. People still would have crawled over each other to get them. But that's just kind of the Longines ethos as it's evolved. And Longines, going back in 50 years, these were and are watches that are held in very high esteem. So it's amazing that Longines hasn't become too big for their britches, I suppose. Anyway, this is really the watch that started today's conversation. This watch really blew me away, and I just know so many women that would want this watch, and I know so many men that would, love to see this watch in their wives' wrists. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. I have been a Squarespace client for about 10 years now, and I would certainly not be the entrepreneur that I am today had it not been for Squarespace. When I started my company, I didn't have the budget to hire a web developer that was really expensive to build a beautiful website, and I certainly didn't have the capacity of my own intellect to do it. I didn't know how to do it. And I actually had tried a Squarespace competitor at one point, and that was an absolute disaster, and I was turned off entirely. I didn't know what to do. And then someone recommended I try Squarespace, and I did. And really, in the beginning, it was just their templates that just blew my mind. It was, this wide variety, this catalog of templates that were just so beautiful and professional and on brand, and you could play around with them. And now, I mean, the company has just evolved their technology so much between their drag and drop system and their AI tools and their SEO tools and their flexible payment tools and their client invoicing tools. I mean, Squarespace has become, and when I started 10 years ago, they were a heck of a partner. I mean, they were a great partner. I've continued to use them, but now the amount of technology and tools that Squarespace has implemented to make themselves really the perfect partner for your digital presence, it's unbelievable. I don't just recommend you sign up for Squarespace and reserve a domain and explore these templates and explore this technology and tools if you're new to business. I don't just recommend it if you don't have a website and you're looking to start one. I also recommend it if you have a business and maybe you're even kind of happy with your website, maybe. I'm telling you, it takes such a small amount of time to explore the options, and you're going to be blown away. You're going to see so quickly that Squarespace can enable you for such wild success over the next 6 months, really way sooner, but to really just, you're going to look back in a couple months and say, oh my God, I mean, the partner that this company is, the beauty of this website, the functionality of my company has just exploded. I couldn't possibly be more of an advocate for Squarespace. So head on over to the link down below and use the code Theo Harris at checkout for 10% off your first website or domain. Thank you to Squarespace. Everyone head on over and explore their technology. Now, the other watch I wanted to talk about today is the Tudor Black Bay 36 in two-tone. When I saw this watch, and the price is $6,300, so it's just over $6,000, I couldn't believe the quality of the piece. Now, it's more than 3 times the price of the Longines. It's a totally different watch, and it's more, it's more formal than the Longines. It's a lot of things the Longines isn't, and intentionally so. But even with, diamond markers, warm patina and everything, this watch is kind of a no-brainer. Tudor doesn't really try to sell the market a Rolex alternative. They don't really try to do that. I don't think you really need to compare Tudor to Rolex all the time as much as we do. Of course, the two companies are related. Rolex owns Tudor. Sure, that's absolutely true. And they have so much shared history and design language and all this stuff. There's no question about that. But for me, and I think for many, Tudor really does stand on its own 2 legs completely. That's why I think it's kind of great that Tudor doesn't really, cash in on the Rolex name. I think that a lot of people don't even know that the two brands are affiliated outside of the really core watch group. I mean, of course, we all know that, but I'm talking about the average consumer. Tudor is just a manufacturer of evidently, as soon as you hold them, evidently well-made watches that just make sense. And I've always said that about that Rolex kind of design, that oyster case, right? The proportions and everything like that. Like, these watches just kind of make sense. They just feel right. I think you don't really have to know anything about watches to put one on and say, oh yeah, this feels expensive. This feels reliable. That's just Rolex, right? And I don't think you can say the same thing about a lot of other brands, and a lot of other brands that are great in and of their own right, but it requires like an education to understand why they're good. You just put on a Rolex and it's like, oh, this is good. This is a good watch. I like this, right? This feels expensive. And the same thing is true for Tudor. When I saw this watch and the way that the light caught the facets and the diamonds on the indices and even the warm lume on the hands and on the dial, And the bevels, I mean, that goes to the fastest. This watch is fantastic. I tried it on. I couldn't believe the quality of the bracelet. I tried it on at London Jewelers in Manhasset, and I was really blown away. And I'm a big date just guy, right? I love that design language, right? Again, not trying to compare these two things directly, but of course it would be ridiculous to not point out the obvious that this company, right, this Rolex holding company, has or is attempting to achieve this beautiful design, one with date, one without, but beautiful design on what is essentially a jubilee, right? And they do it perfectly at both companies. At both companies, they do it perfectly. And, and I haven't always felt that way. I haven't always felt that Tudor, made a perfect women's alternative or a perfect women's, date just alternative, right? I haven't always felt that way. But here, I just couldn't believe it. So between this and the Conquest, believe it or not, when I walked into London Jewelers, those are the two watches I actually picked up quickest, and not because anyone told me to. That's funny, right? And it's because they pushed me out of my comfort zone. They pushed me out of my comfort zone. I don't pick up women's watches, and I did here today. Not to say that this 36 millimeter, right, Black Bay couldn't be worn by a man, because of course it could and it would. But it certainly appeals to women very much. And if you can scratch that itch for a little over $6,000, why spend 12 or 14 or 16? Makes no sense. So now zooming out a little bit, just a couple of notes on the present and future of women's watches. I'm really optimistic about it. Like really optimistic about it. There are influencers in this world, like Timepiece is a really good example, that have done such a terrific job. Storytelling may be a strong word, but creating a space for women and men, for that matter, of course, as well, particularly like metropolitan sort of like cultural vibes, to, I guess, get into it, think it's cool, right? Educate themselves a little bit, and from different perspectives, be it from history or be it from fashion or whatever. I think that, one thing that Timepiece of Brynn did that was really great, was put together like these horoscope, right, watch matchings. I would never do that. That is absolutely more something that would come from a publication or from a channel or whatever that's targeting women. Of course, women and East Village, right, men, right, of course. That's everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? But I thought it was great. It was approachable, and it was speaking the language of the target audience that I don't always do in the watch industry, right? Like, I don't particularly create content that is focused on getting women involved in watches. I just speak my mind about watches, and just because I'm not intentionally trying to target women and trying to like get them more interested, the content is just more like me, and I'm more like I'm like just shooting shit at a bar, right, with a bunch of guys and drinking and saying dirty jokes and making dirty illusions and whatever, right? I'm not great at getting women involved in this watch world. I know that. And frankly, I think that most of my counterparts aren't either. I think that they're all fairly bad at it, right? For all different reasons, okay? But this new era of creators, and it's not just Brynn, it's other people too. Girls O'Clock, is a bunch of them, right? That have done such a great job. And really, Hodinkee was kind of a beginning for that, right? Cara Barrett of Hodinkee was really one of the kind of original, women in the space. It's a different perspective, and the amount of women that I've seen get interested in this space in the last 3 years has been astronomical when compared to 6, 7, 8 years ago. The space has grown in general, of course, as we know, but I'm really pleased to say that I truly see significant growth among women. I see larger interest. I see women spending more money. I see women, I think that the great test is I see women, instead of getting their third love bracelet, they get a watch, right? Or a second love bracelet, or even a first, even a first maybe, right? They get a watch. They get a really great Cartier Panthère, right? Or they get a really great Rolex Datejust. And maybe it's even vintage, right? And the more comfortable they get in the space, and the more they're spoken to, and the more they're acknowledged, and the more they're catered to, basically, on an educational level, the deeper they'll get, the deeper they'll dive. And the most that I had ever previously really understood women to be involved in watches were, wives of my fans, right? And a lot of them love it because it's something to bond with their husband about, and it's something that they can kind of poke fun about, and it's playful and it's fun, and they take them to events. I love that. I love talking to wives at events, right? Because we make fun of their husbands a little bit. We bust chops. The husbands we're all breaking chops about how ridiculous all of this is. And I always apologize to the women for for the fact that my voice is probably in their home on a television sometimes because their husband doesn't know that he should use headphones, right? And I always apologize, and it's adorable. I really love it. But this is active. It's active growth. And I think it's great. And I think that Tudor and Longines have done a fantastic job. Of course, the watch doesn't need to cater to women for women to wear it. That goes without being said. To even imply otherwise would be, just to try to start a divide out of nowhere because you're bored, right? And that's just your identity. Your identity is bored, I've seen, I think a woman wearing a Rolex. I grew up with a girl that wore a Rolex Hulk in high school. And I thought it was awesome. Sari. I'll never forget that. It was awesome. It was so cool, right? Before any of us had anything, she had a Hulk. I think it was her dad's or something. It was just the coolest thing. There's so many watches that women just look terrific in, and so many watches that men, that isn't like culturally whatever, decisively masculine today that men still wear, and I do too, right? I still wear a little old Cartier tank. Sometimes they're even technically manufactured for women, and I enjoy them. It doesn't say anything, but we're playing around a little bit and expanding our taste and experimenting with this great hobby and sizing and proportions, and it's just educational, But the point of this video is to say, great job, Tudor. Great job, Longines. And just great job to the female influencers in the watch world that have just done a great job bringing more women in and expanding this great community and making it not only larger, but making it more diverse. I don't mean of gender, I mean of genre. Right? The more great women's watches there are, right? That's a whole other facet. It's a better polished facet of this industry, period. And I'm all about that. So thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you want more from Theo and Harris, go sign up for our podcast at The Zero. Link is down below, and I'll see you all soon.